What up, y'all? I'm Dr. CBS here with my girl, Dr. Layla Brown, rocking that dope new haircut. And we are still on break, but what we're bringing you is a throwback episode all the way from season 1 that shows how it all began. That is how me and Dr. Layla Brown got together to co-host this season.
And then you'll also get to see how my segment, She Gathered Me, came to be.
Ow. I am so excited today for our interview segment. We have my girl, Dr. Layla Brown Vincent, to talk about her work, to talk about growing up in a movement family, to talk about, what it means to have sister, comrade, friends in the academy. So I'm so excited for this conversation, but let me just read her bio first. All right. Dr. Layla Brown Vincent is a member of the All African People's Revolutionary Party, GC, Guinea Conakry, and currently works as an assistant professor of Africanist Studies at the University of Massachusetts, Boston. Layla earned a PhD in cultural anthropology from Duke University in her home state of North Carolina, where her research focused on Black racial identity formation in Latin America and the US and its impact on Black radical organizing in the era of Black Lives Matter. She is currently working on her first book manuscript, Return to the Source, The Dialectics of 21st Century Pan-African Liberation, which is based largely on her dissertation research. Layla spent all of 2020 as a visiting research fellow at the Johannesburg Institute for Advanced Study, where her research expanded to examine the crisis of racial capitalism and the COVID-19 pandemic. And let me just tell y'all, I was salty about that year-long sojourn in South Africa because she forgot about your girl, but I've forgiven her. Anyway, her most recent scholarly work, The Pandemic of Racial Capitalism, Another World is Possible, can be found in From the European South, a transdisciplinary journal of post-colonial humanities. And we're going to talk about that article. So welcome, Dr. Layla Brown Vincent.
Can I just say that I don't think you'll bring me onto this show to talk about radical sisterly comradeship and say that I left you behind for a year. That is not, those two don't jive. So I don't even know how to talk about that.
Did you or did you not go to South Africa for a year? And I talked to you maybe 12 times?
Lies and deceit. I did go to South Africa. However,
I will say, in what was that, February 2020, you flew in for other reasons, but did come see me when I was in Massachusetts. We did link up. So
thank you.
I take some of that bitterness back, but only some.
Yes, I literally flew across the Atlantic Ocean and then drove 2 hours to see you and hang out with you. You're not going to do like that.
That's fair. Okay, I'm so excited to have you here, Layla. All right, so let's start out with this first question about your upbringing. So you grew up in a movement family, and you happen to be the niece of the famous, the prodigious Bob Brown of the AAPR-PGC. And then you became a scholar activist. So can you talk a little bit about why you chose to do your PhD in cultural anthropology, and how have you balanced your intellectual work with your organizing and activism work?
So, I mean, there's a lot of different ways to start that conversation. I would have to say that, like, growing up in my family, I was surrounded by books, surrounded by by political organizing, surrounded by like the level of, I think, kind of political engagement and thought that even my parents, I don't think, realized that I had really fully digested until I got older. And so, I think we're in a slightly different moment in social history. And so, you gotta figure out a way to exist in the world. So I went to North Carolina Central University for undergrad, and I was a history and Spanish double major.
And a Delta.
Yes, I am a Delta.
Ski-wee.
Don't hate.
Not Kamala Ski-wee, but anyway, please continue.
You know what? A lot of my mentors are AKAs, and you know what my favorite thing to say to them is?
What?
Better for your children.
Okay, I'm gonna let that go so you can finish your story.
Anyway, you made me start train of thought. You're a fool. Oh no! So I went to North Carolina Central University, and I was studying history and Spanish. And like the reason why that even came about, like I grew up, around a number of different international communities. I was named by my parents Palestinian and South African friends and American Indian movement. So in a way, even though I hadn't really left the country as a young person, I felt like I grew up with the experiences of people who had lived everywhere. And so that was one of my goals, right, in college. And so I got to study abroad a couple different times. I went to Mexico for a summer, which was great. I went to the Dominican Republic for a semester, which was awful. And and I should be fair, it was awful because I think that the Dominican Republic and Spain, because of their particular racialized histories, are places that people of African descent, particularly people of African descent that are darker than a certain hue and who wear their hair natural, need particular kinds of trigger warnings about. And, my experience as a Black woman being, racialized or nationalized as Haitian, although there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, it's just that I'm not Haitian, created a lot of, I think, particular kind of racialized and gendered experiences, like going to school every day. I would be accosted like I was a prostitute, right? And so it actually made me start asking questions about, what is it about the way race is constructed in the Dominican Republic, but in the Latin American context in general. Fortunately, I had two really good teachers at the time, Blas Jimenez, who was a poet, a literary scholar, and Juan Rodriguez, who was actually an anthropologist, who helped me kind of make sense of these particular histories between the Dominican Republic and Haiti, and the ways in which the Dominican Republic racializes itself as non-Black vis-a-vis Haiti as this sort of Black republic. And that kind of, that spurred my interest in Latin America, in questions of race. And then, like most people, when I got ready to go to grad school, I didn't know what I was going to do. But what I said to myself, it's real. Like, even when I was in college, I had planned on being an English teacher. And it was because of the kind of high school English teacher on top of that. It was the mentorship that I received that pushed me to consider graduate school. And I was like, I don't necessarily want to study language. I want to continue to use language, but I don't want to study language. And I don't want to do a whole bunch of archival research, which, jokes on me, still did that anyway. But I was like, okay, how does this work? And anthropology is kind of what I fell into. And then anthropology for me was just really useful because of, ethnography as a central method, right? A way of, experiencing, being true to your sort of experiential way of learning and existing. And for me, that was also a way to continue to contribute to social and political movements while contributing both in a sort of material sense and in an intellectual sense. And so for me, that was, the way that it made sense. And I had a family that was very invested in that work always. In fact, it was my father who even suggested Venezuela. As I was getting ready to consider graduate school, he was like, there's some interesting stuff happening in Venezuela. Like, Venezuela has the potential for your generation to be what Cuba was for a lot of Black diaspora, for that generation. And for a while it was. I mean, I think there are a lot of interesting things happening now, but that's kind of what took me there.
That is amazing. That's such an interesting story, especially the ways in which like mentorship shaped your path. I feel like I was just kind of like, I'm gonna do this now. Like, it's so funny how drift and how arbitrary like shit being, like, you go back and you ascribe meaning to it. But so, for example, I applied to 2 PhD programs because I didn't want to take the GRE. And I was like, well, it's going to be the Academy or the Pole. Let's see how it goes. And it worked out that it was the Academy.
Academy or the Pole.
Both were viable. Both were viable. Don't play me. So anyway.
I'm so tired of you.
Speaking of the Pole, no, just kidding. So you identify as a Pan-African feminist. What do you mean by that? And how does that inform your work, your orientation, and your praxis?
It's funny because I would say growing up, my identity as a woman in a woman's body, in a female body, it wasn't central to how I thought about myself. And it wasn't really until I went to college and really started experiencing the ways that my showing up in places as a woman dictated how people responded to me, and even how they could hear me, right? Because like, like basic aggressions, like I literally just said the same thing this dude said, and somehow y'all heard everything he said, but not me, right? And like in the classroom. And so for me, I think you've talked about this a lot, like your own kind of trajectory towards Marxism was very much an intellectual one. For me, that's the same, like for Pan-Africanism, for me was was an ethos, right? It was it was a way of life. It was how I grew up. But feminism was really an intellectual endeavor for me. It wasn't something I really pursued or considered until undergraduate, and then really even more so in graduate school. Because, I was fortunate, my mentor that I didn't name her, but Dr. Baina Muhammad, she historian at North Carolina Central University, even though she never taught any classes on feminism when I was there, I get mad at her now because she does teach classes on Black feminism now. I'm like,
your antennas, yeah.
Exactly. There was a lot that she exposed me to, and so it made me start to ask questions. And so for me, my identity as a Black person, as an African, as a Pan-Africanist is first and foremost. But I also recognize the ways in which contradictions of gender show up, and even for people who have certain kinds of political ethics, be they Pan-Africanists, be they Marxists, be they socialists, be they whatever. I think it's something that's important about being intentional about naming the particular kind of gender critique, right? Because for me, being a Pan-Africanist, the way that the AAPR-PGC understands Pan-Africanism is in the ways in which Kwame Nkrumah, Sekou Touré, and Kwame Touré understood it, which is as an objective. It's a political objective, right? Which is the total liberation and unification of Africa under scientific socialism, right? All of the other ways in which people, deploy and utilize Pan-Africanism, are cool, but for me, it's a political goal and objective, right?
Period.
And so, exactly. And then for me, feminism it's a critique, right? It's a lens. It's a way of adding to that. And so for me, identifying as a Pan-African feminist is both about centralizing my racialized and sort of historicized position as a person of African descent, as a descendant of people who have been impacted by the transatlantic slave trade and the histories of colonization, but also to understand that even as we pay attention to the ways in which race and empire impact our lives, we also have to be intentional about situating the ways in which gendered oppression has taken on its own life. And I think for me, it's always important to name them together along with class, because for me, the Cuban Revolution is the sort of primary example of this. And it's the reason why, for me, the Bolivarian Revolution became even more of interest, is because, when the Cuban Revolution triumphed, the material conditions of life really changed for a number of people in Cuba. And then there was this kind of belief that the issues of race and gender were kind of settled, right? And then as soon as the Soviet Union fell, the special period opened, all of these tensions about race resurfaced, which means that they were never dealt with. What was dealt with was sort of some of, not all of, the material inequalities that people experience, but the underlying logics of Black inferiority, of sort of male superiority, were not done away with. And so to me, you can't actually begin the process of deconstructing those types of oppression without naming them first. And so for me, that's why it's important to name myself as a Pan-African feminist.
Okay. Our conversation about this is ongoing, but that's very, I think that's very convincing, and I think very useful, especially for for people who are coming to consciousness at this moment, right? Like, how do you want to name your politics, and beyond just naming them, how do you want to root your identity in politics, right? So, something I say often now is to have identity rooted in politics as opposed to politics rooted in identity. And I think that how you just explained out Pan-African feminism is actually really, I think, be a Pan-African feminist.
So I just want to say, I feel like I can spend the rest of the day not doing anything, because if anybody who knows you knows that, like, ain't really your jam. And as many times as we've had conversations about this, this is the first time you've actually said to me that what I said to you was convincing. So I think I'm gonna sit on my couch for the rest of the day, and I got to teach. But other than that,
I know, like, you gotta teach later, so don't do that. But yeah. I mean, I
you know what I'm
feel
teaching today? Africanist Feminism's class.
Yeah, and you even convinced me that to apply for this canon thing, this canon feminist summer school. Well, you and Joy James sent it to me, so I feel compelled. If Joy James sends you this thing, to go for it. So I'm coming along, but and I'm not some gender troglodyte, y'all. I have an actual critique of this, but that's neither here nor there. That's for another show. Okay. Next. So now I want to shift gears a little bit to talk about your new article, The Pandemic of Racial Capitalism, Another World is Possible. And I really love that article, especially your discussion of medical internationalism. So can you speak about the relationship that you discuss in there about the relationship between COVID-19 and racial capitalism, as well as medical internationalism? And then, you say another world is possible. So what is this alternative world that you see as possible through Pan-African feminism or other models?
Mm-hmm. I mean, even though you hated on me for being in South Africa, I think what was really it was really useful and I think eye-opening to watch the pandemic unfold as a person who was born and raised in the U.S. outside of the U.S. because it was and continues to be a shit show, right? The way the U.S. is supposedly one of the most developed countries in the world is just utterly incapable of dealing with a crisis of this magnitude, right? And especially at this point, maybe we could argue back in February, March, April, we still didn't really have a sense of what we're dealing with. But at this point, we know a lot about what the virus is, what makes certain people vulnerable and susceptible. Even though we don't necessarily have a cure per se, we know that things like vitamin D deficiencies and rest and stress are really important in treating them, right? So one of the things that I started looking at was what are different countries doing, right? And so the kind of list of things that I named that Venezuela and Cuba were doing. Cuba, from the triumph of the revolution, really began to engage in this sort of medical diplomacy, right? So because there were two very essential commitments that the Cuban Revolution made to its people early on, which was socialized medicine and socialized education, right? But a part of what socialized medicine means for Cuba is not just that everyone has access to healthcare. It's also about a particular kind of situated understanding of the way health is impacted by the environment, by all kinds of things, right? And so the way that medicine operates in Cuba is that doctors live in the communities that they serve. They're aware of the types of environmental things that are impacting our health, as well as whatever is happening or at a sort of cellular or biological level. And so, I think it's really important to understand that because of the blockade, because of the sort of the U.S.'s preoccupation with punishing the Cuban Revolution for daring to, be self-determined, the Cuban medical system had to really focus on preventative care as opposed to palliative care, which is what I would say, care in the U.S. is like, which has meant that, throughout the pandemic, I think the last time I looked at numbers, less than 200 people in Cuba have passed away because of COVID. And then in the Venezuelan case, whose education and healthcare system since the Bolivarian Revolution began in 1999 has been largely informed by the Cuban medical system. I think less than 1,500 people have died. And to me, in the Venezuelan case, that's an even greater feat because Venezuela is exactly because of the sanctions, because of the declining price of oil, because of the sort of, scarcity of basic necessities, to be able to still maintain a certain preoccupation with the quality of life in spite of all of that, to me speaks toward a particular kind of politics. Because there were other kinds of policies that were put in place, right? So, as with less than 100 cases or something like that, I can't remember the exact number, sorry. Maduro made an announcement that, nobody would be fired from their jobs for 6 months. Nobody would be evicted from their houses. They would continue to have access to health care, all of these kinds of basic, the right to life, right? I think a preoccupation with the preservation of life, which is what I argue, that, no matter how imperfect the socialist experiment that's occurring in Venezuela is, I think that there's something to the ethics of socialism that says that there's a fundamental preoccupation with the preservation of life. And in the US, that is not it. These people, they still squabbling over $1,400 a year later. Right?
That's not even funny, but it is sad.
Funny. It's ridiculous, right? And so for me, the world that is possible is a world that cares about us as people. And and that cares about our lives, the quality of our life, right? As opposed to seeing us as mechanisms for exploitation to generate profit. And what's really important about that to me in this particular case is that people will often argue, we haven't seen any successful communist or socialist revolutions. What does capitalist success look like for the masses of people? It looks like suffering and disease and death.
And also, what we have to understand is that these are socialist societies in a capitalist world economy. Okay. The system of capitalism is a failure for as you're saying, for the overwhelming majority of people. So, so this is what happens when you have socialist societies in a capitalist world economy. But the capitalist system as such has immiserated the overwhelming majority of the world, right? And so these are red herring arguments. And when you have things like sanctions, blockades, the CIA, right? COINTELPRO, and the list goes on. Of course, socialist societies are going to be hampered. So it's and then the other thing that I was thinking about when you were speaking is Patricia Rodney's work. And so I invite people to listen to Patricia Rodney's interview on the Groundings podcast with Dev Springer, where she was talking about her research and her book. It's like women healthcare workers. She was comparing the Grenadian case to Barbados, and essentially after the Grenadian Revolution, they had a lot of Cuban doctors come in. And so what she said was that the way in which the Grenadian people related to the Cuban doctors was very positive. It was they were very receptive. They appreciated the sort of wraparound approach to medicine, which is in contradistinction to the Barbados system, where it was much more developed, but it was the sterile Western. Doctor is the expert model, where patients feel, dehumanized, or they feel less able to speak up. There's the class politics of it all. And so I invite people to look up Patricia Rodney's book. It's very great. And to listen to that interview, because it speaks a lot to what you were talking about in terms of Cuba's medical diplomacy and also their approach to healthcare in general.
And the one thing I want to add even about their medical diplomacy, I don't know how many people have been following Cuba's development of vaccines, but I just want to, so they have 4 vaccines that are running right now. But the most interesting thing to me about the Cuban vaccine trials, first of all, they have 4 different types of vaccine trials that are running, right? That treat the virus in different ways. But the most interesting thing to me about vaccine trials is that Cuba does not have enough sick people in their population to run successful trials, right? So they've had to outsource the trials to Iran and other places, right? And so that in and of itself, right, to me, it actually speaks to something even broader. Cuba itself does not necessarily stand to gain in an immediate material sense from the work that they're doing, from the socialized medicine that they're doing, because their population is relatively healthy. The work that they're doing is about a commitment to a global crisis. And again, that is what I think socialism perpetuates, right? Like the a part of what's happening in the US is the Johnson & Johnson and the Pfizer vaccine. They have bought up all of these vaccines, right? Still can't figure out how they want to disseminate it. And it means that folks on the continent of Africa and Latin America might not have access to vaccines until 2022. And some people not as late until 2023, 2024. The work that Cuba is doing is about a commitment to a global state of health that that doesn't even necessarily immediately benefit their population because their population is generally well, right? And so I mean I think that those are logics, and to me that is the world that is possible. A world where our preoccupation is for our well-being and our health, right? And when I say health, I don't just mean physical health, but our mental health, our psychological health, like all of these different types of things, as opposed to our current existence in the U.S. and in these sort of capitalist neoliberal dominated countries. So that I mean, that is my research historically has really been about Pan-Africanism, and I would argue that like this iteration of the work is not so much about Pan-Africanism in the traditional sense, but what I think for me, it's about a particular kind of logic and an ethos, a way of being and living and existing in the world that I think is better for all of us.
Yeah. So, I, often speak about ethics, epistemology, and politics, and that's really what you're talking about. It's like, it's not just the material reality. It's like, how do we internalize the ethics of that? We rationalize that a huge segment of the population should just die, and that's okay, right? And when we talk about disproportionality and all that, what that can lead to is that, okay, as long as the ruling class has 13% Black folks, because there's 13% of the population, then it's okay to have a ruling class. That's a particular ethical commitment, right? And that's also, it's epistemological. It's the way we understand the world. And so I think your work is really important in challenging both of those things, because that's the internalized nature of it. Those are the hardest things to root out, right? Because like as they say, if the only tool you have is a hammer, everything will look like a nail or whatever. So related to this, right? So like me, you're currently working on a book project, and the struggle. Well, I don't know about for you. I do know a little bit about for you, but like the struggle is realer than real to get this thing done. So can you tell us what your book is about, and like, what is it like writing your first single author manuscript, man? Like, be out here.
It's torture.
It's hard.
Okay, look, I should say this. I struggle with writing. I really, really do. I struggle with writing because for me, the way that I learn, process, internalize, deal with things is social. And for me, writing is not social. The process of writing is not social. Obviously, published material creates a particular kind of sociality, but the process of writing is not social. And, I think actually people like you have actually made me make writing more social than what it has been for me. And I think that that's really one of the problematic ways that we're trained in graduate school, is that they try to make us think that in order to be successful at this thing, you got to go sit in a corner somewhere and be by yourself.
You got to be a fucking troll in the library with your cloak and your stack of books and getting boils and shit like Karl Marx. Everybody doing that. Like, we want to thrive and flourish in the sun. Like,
honey, the sun. Okay, let's not even. I think it was when you did the podcast with Adam McNeil, when you were talking about your like ideal space to write and stuff. Communal and sunshine and food and like green. Like, listen, I've become a plant lady. This is like all of my plants are like my way of creating some kind of life inside. But anyway, so, and I'll also say though that like I knew to push back on that like conception of writing early on. Because one of the things that always bothered me about grad school is that they say, you'll come to a point in your research where like your family and your friends, they just won't understand and you won't be able to talk. That was never the case for me. And it was, but
let me stop you there. Because your daddy read everything, okay?
He does, but he don't have no degree. And that's
but you're able to I'm sure you're able to have particular types of conversations with your your parents, your dad, your brother, who's a physicist. Come on. So I'm just throwing that out there.
But it's not just them. It was also my grandfather who didn't go to school past 8th grade, but who saw it as important to put his 7 kids and wife through college, right? So it wasn't just that. And also beyond that, so that there may be some truth to the fact that the nuance of a particular issue may require a little bit more work to explain.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
But then the question that I would ask, for those of us who claim that we're concerned with the freedom of our people, what does it mean that we do work that we can't talk to our people about? It don't mean shit. It don't mean shit.
Right.
So like for me, really. And so for me, I don't think that I would have survived graduate school had I not done it close to home. Like if I had gone and tried to like cut myself off, I couldn't have done it. And so like, for me, the process of writing this book is like somewhat of a traumatic return to the dissertation writing process. But it's also been nice. I think this is the one thing I'll say, the one good thing that has come, I think, out of this COVID moment. You and I, like over the last couple of weeks, we've had like 2 or 3 days a week where we've just logged in and looked at each other and written, right? And tried to do work. And I realized that I am a person who needs external accountability. And so
most people do.
Yeah. And I think an important component of your process is realizing like who you are. So like I can write all the plans and I can put all the blocks on my calendar. But if somebody don't say, hey, Layla, let's do this, Layla is going to be watching TV. She's going to be something else. Or like prepping for class or doing something else that feels more doable in the moment, because this book still seems like this huge thing. But I think, the smaller public outward facing things like the blog posts, like the interviews, it helps get me energized about the book project again, because it reminds me that people are really invested in the essence of the project. And so the essence of the project, so I started doing my dissertation research around 2010, 2011. So this was a couple years before Chavez passed. The Bolivarian Revolution was still doing fairly well, but this also happened to be the time that Trayvon Martin was killed. The movement for Black Lives Matter, the movement for Black Lives was sort of picking up. And so a lot of what the book is concerned with is the way that grassroots organizing among people of African descent in the U.S. and Venezuela is this sort of kind of 21st century return to a Pan-African ethos. And the way that comes about for me is literally from the process of doing field work. When I first started going to Venezuela, the amount of people that I encountered who were just like random people from the US who may or may not have had some kind of academic background, but who wanted to come to Venezuela to see what was going on. I was like, oh shit, like this is cool. Like people are like, there's some here. And then as I was in Venezuela, people started asking me, well, what's happening in the US, right? And then there were so many of these interesting parallels, because I think another interesting parallel at the level of the state was that both of these movements, the Network of Afro-Venezuelans and the Movement for Black Lives in the US, were proliferating under the first self-identified Black presidents, right? Very different. So Chavez is Afro-Indigenous. We know Barack Obama is Black and white. But to me, there was... Shut up. But there were particular questions for me about the way that Afro-descendant organizing was looking on the ground in Venezuela, in a country that was pushing itself towards Bolivarianismo, what some people later would call Chavismo, or what Chavez called 21st century socialism, and what it meant for the Bolivarian Revolution to take seriously the issues and concerns of Afro-descendants in that particular country, what it meant in the US that the prison population was like, expanding exponentially. One of the sort of largest moments of social upheaval around sort of anti-Black racism and structural inequality that Black people experience occurred under our first Black president. And so for me, there were a lot of like interesting points of comparison. And again, you know, for me, as a person who doesn't actually identify that much as an optimist, like finding hope in what was happening in Venezuela, right? And one of the things I think, even to this day, even as the Venezuelan government struggles with sanctions, whatever, one of the things that I think the population has maintained is that they voted for Chavez and his successor Maduro, and in spite of their issues with Maduro in this particular moment, what they know is that is the person they want to struggle with. That is the government that has taken seriously their issues or concerns, even if they've done so perfectly. And what we know as Black people in the U.S. is that this place ain't never loved us, right? Like one of my chapters in my dissertation was "Never Loved Us," and it was because the Dream Defenders at the time had taken Drake's song "Motherfuckers Never Loved Us" as a mantra, and it's a way of thinking about Black relations to the state of the U.S., right? Like they never loved us, never cared about, you know, our prospects for life. And so the book project explores that both from a sort of ethnographic, social movement perspective, but it's also for me an important return to the canon of Pan-Africanism. And that's the intellectual project of the book, I think. You know, one of the things I encountered when I was in grad school, one is that a lot of the people that I encountered just had not read or were not familiar with Nkrumah's work, Sekou Touré's work, Nyere's work, all these different kind of Pan-African statesmen, but also thinkers, right?
Right.
And, some people like Shilin Bembe, who was trying to push his Afropolitanism at the time, made arguments like Pan-Africanism was passé, right? And so for me, I think that there is an important kind of situated knowledge that needs to be acknowledged. And this is why for me, even why I don't, as much as the work of Marx, I think contributes to all of the work that I use and do, which is why I don't necessarily center Marx, because for me, it's important.
Who does?
A lot of people.
We center, I think we engage, I know I'm being facetious, but we engage our people who engage Marx. It's like, how did they take up Marx and Lenin and Mao, Bukharin and the whites?
Exactly.
We start with the Negro question, so to speak, or the African question,
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that for me, there is an intellectual project in that. Like, and you and I have talked a lot about this, the Black studies canon in the sort of broad, expanded way, but also I think in, not relegating Pan-Africanism to this moment of African independence.
Right. Yeah, the dustbins of history and shit. Like, hey, it's out here. Yeah.
And as much as I utilize the understanding of Pan-Africanism as a political objective, there's also work that these people did to be thinkers, to be theorists, to ideologues, to use a word that's a little bit problematic. But I think it's important, if we are thinking about ourselves as scholars of Black life, that we also take seriously people who have theorized our experiences from our particular historical and material realities. Yeah. And so for me, that, and a lot of people will tell me like this project is like broad and expansive, and to use one of your favorite words, capacious. And but the thing is, I think that our lives are that. Like, there's no way for me to do the work. And this is also why autoethnography is another both method and form of writing that I use, because one of the things that was really difficult when I was in grad school was to make it make sense to people. Like, they were like, why are all of these things coming in? And for me, I realized that it was my upbringing that made all of those things make sense without having to do any kind of particular work. And so telling my own story in that was a way of making the questions make sense.
See, I feel like I don't want people in my business. So I'm the complete opposite. Like, I tried to just write about things at a level of abstraction, because it's like, don't worry about what I got going on. This is what I'm talking about. So I understand what you're saying. And
I think that's another thing that feminist politics does for me, is that it takes embodied knowledge and experience seriously, and as a place from which we theorize, right? And so that is why I ain't really concerned about, we always make editorial decisions. There are things that I won't say, and not even just about me. There are things I won't say about the people that I do work with because of their goals and objectives and what is useful and not useful to actually put on paper. Because the thing is, as much as we imagine ourselves as writing for the benefit of our people, we know our enemies are always reading and listening to our shit too. And so anything that we put down on paper can be used to our benefit or our detriment. And so we're constantly making, those kinds of decisions. But that for me is, that's the essence of the project. And it's, it's still overwhelming. So,
yeah, but we doing it. That's the thing not to forget. Like you're writing a book. Cause I'm like, we're writing our books. It's just, it's a struggle bus, but we on it. We're on that raggedy ass struggle bus and we're doing it. So, just in our last few minutes, the last thing I wanted to talk about is and you mentioned it some about the ways in which we're trained to be individualists, that our work should be in isolation and in some ways in competition. But we've managed to maintain Black colleague, comrade, friends, sisterships in the academy, right? And so we actually met about a year ago. No, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. Yeah, 2 or 3 at that History Makers conference. I will reserve judgment about that. But, and just me basically making you talk to me like, hey girl, leaning on you and stuff. I mean, there was wine involved, I admit, but since then we've basically, we've been inseparable. So, South Africa notwithstanding, but but you were also part of our junior faculty mastermind group before you went to South Africa, and we're just patiently waiting for you to return. And that was another collective that we organized to just do this process together to go through tenure and promotion together. Mm-hmm. So how has what I would call mutual comradeship, this sort of collective approach to the work, how has that helped you navigate the academy along with relationships with other Black radicals or Black folks like your mentors and such?
It has literally been my saving grace. There's no way that I would still be here were it not for that. And what's funny about when we met, right? We were at this table. And it's so crazy. Me and you were sitting next to each other and not talking to each other. You're talking to everybody else around this table. And I think you heard her say something about Chavez. And then you were like, oh. And then it just went. And so for me, what was genuine, I think, about our connection was that, we saw each other as 2 young people, 2 Black women, whatever. But it was your fundamental interest, not necessarily in my research, but in the same things that I was interested in. And for me, that I had graduate school was so isolating for me. I really struggled. I was the only Black person in my program. I was the only Latin Americanist in my program at the time. Obviously, nobody was thinking about Pan-Africanism in any way, shape, fashion, or form, and thinking about Black women. So it was just what am I doing here? To be honest, I don't even. Navigating that whole grad school process, I didn't know what I was doing. I had not a clue. And I think I still have not a clue about navigating this tenure process, but I feel like having other folks through the masterminds, other folks that I've met, just to know, one, to have some mutual commiseration, but then 2, to also just you need it sometimes. But mutual support, I would not be here. I literally would have left. And it's funny because my dad always told me that he was like, you can't do this shit alone. You have to have community, period. Whatever it is. And I'm so grateful to be able to shoot you a text or call you and be like, these motherfuckers are trying to kill me.
They tried it yet again. Listen, I have dumped my whole purse out about my 3rd-year review, among other things. So yeah, I definitely feel you 100%. It's definitely a lifeline.
And then even, we about to enjoy, a good. I don't care what nobody say. We in the middle of COVID. We about to go have a
We're
writing
going
retreat.
to Miami on a writing retreat. Judge us.
Yeah.
Judge us. And we'll have more about that later. But yeah. So we've reached the end of our conversation. But anything else you want to add? Where can people find you?
So on Twitter, I'm PanAfric with a K, Fem_PhD. I don't really I'm not a good social media person. I'm trying to be better. My little academia.edu. I don't even have a real website. I'm janky. I'm still trying to be, some kind of professional. But yeah, you can find me there, the academia.edu and Twitter. And be on the lookout for these things. I think I've got some stuff at AIHS on their blog, be writing some more for them. And apparently, you and I will be having some more collaborations in the future. So I'm looking forward to that too.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining me, Layla Bean, as I like to call you, that you hate. But thank you for being here. This was such an amazing and wonderful conversation. So I look forward to having you back.
I am coming on to let you all know that I will be doing a feature segment for the rest of this season that may continue on into next season. And the segment is going to be called She Gathered Me. And today I just want to talk a little bit about what I'm thinking about for the segment and how I'm going to sort of move forward. So I guess the first place to start is where the name comes from. So I think many of you all have heard me say already that my mother passed away in 2018. She passed away in September of 2018. She was battling lupus and had a heart attack related to her lupus. And after my mother passed away, I've been struggling with a lot of things and figuring out how to make sense of it. And as I spent last year in Johannesburg, South Africa, I decided to get a tattoo. And I was trying to think about a tattoo that would honor my mother. And what I actually came up with is the quote, "She gathered me," from Toni Morrison's Beloved. And the reason why I came to this quote is because as a child, actually not just as a child, for over 20 years, my mother had a book club called Sister Chat with her friends, and they met monthly to read books, all different kinds of books, and generally, fellowship with one another. And so what I want to do first is read the passage that it comes from and then talk a little bit more about that. So this is towards the end of Beloved, right? This is after Beloved has disappeared. This is sort of the climax of the book, after the climax of the book. And Paul D and Seth are sitting talking to each other. And so she says, Paul D, he says, "What, baby?" "She left me." "Oh, girl, don't cry." She says, "She was my best thing." Paul D sits down in the rocking chair and examines the quilt patch in carnival colors. His hands are limp between his knees. There are too many things to feel about this woman. His head hurts. Suddenly, he remembers Sixo trying to describe what he felt about the 30-mile woman. What he felt was, "She is a friend of my mind. She gathered me. The pieces I am, she gathered them and give them back to me in all the right order. It's good, when you got a woman who is a friend of your mind." He's staring back at the quilt, but he is thinking about her wrought iron back, the delicious mouth still puffy at the corner from Ella's fist, the mean black eyes, the wet dress streaming before the fire. Her tenderness about his neck jewelry is 3 wands like attentive baby rattlers, curving 2 feet into the air. How she never mentioned or looked at it, so he did not have to feel the shame of being collared like a beast. Only this woman, Setha, could have left him his manhood like that. He wants to put his story next to hers. "Seth," he says, "me and you, we got more yesterdays than anybody. We need some kind of tomorrow." He leans over and takes her hand. With the other, he touches her face. "You, your best thing, Seth, you are." His holding fingers are holding hers. And she asks him, "Me?" what this quote sort of made me think about, and in particular, the sort of smaller bracketed quote, "She gathered me, man. The pieces I am, she gathered them and give them back to me in all the right order." So I ended up getting that particular tattoo on my arm here above this portrait of my mother. And one of the things that I wanted to think about with this segment, if you all watched Sharice and I's first segment together, I think it was episode 4, we had a conversation about what I was thinking about in terms of the concept of Pan-African feminism. And I wanted to take this segment as an opportunity to think about radical comradeship among women, among Black women, this concept of revolutionary love. I wanted to take this opportunity to kind of flesh out some of my ideas. And I'm sure actually at some point in time, Sharice and I have talked about these sort of different analytics and heuristics for thinking about the oppression of Black women. And, as a sort of framework, Sharice prefers triple oppression as a way of thinking about the way we experience oppression, which is not something that I disagree with. But as I said, I'm trying to articulate what I see as a sort of Pan-African feminism. And so over the course of these segments and in the future, I hope to think about the sort of nuanced differences between what womanists argue womanism is, what the sort of understanding of triple oppression is in relationship to other more mainstream ideas like intersectionality. I also hope to make this a space to actually talk about the practice of revolutionary love and sisterly comradeship. I hope to interview my mentors and teachers and friends and students, and for us to think about what it means to come to some sort of political understanding about the way we relate to one another. This past Valentine's Day is the first one I spent alone in a long time. And I actually spent the day reading this particular book, The Communism of Love. And one of the things that comes up in the first couple pages are two things that really spoke to me. And the first is this idea that love is a practice of relationality that is incommensurate with capitalist exchange relations. And the second, which is a sort of expansion of that notion, is that love activates a sensibility about being with people that is antithetical to capitalist reasons for being with others. And I was really happy to come across this because this is a book that was published just last year, because when I was working on my dissertation, the final chapter in my dissertation is a chapter about revolutionary love. And in particular, it was a chapter thinking about the ways that we try to incorporate ideas of love into our radical and revolutionary practice. And also, again, in the ways that we relate to one another. And so that is, what I'm hoping to do, walk you all through some of my, lesser and more developed ideas in my research, the work that I'm doing with Afro-Venezuelan women, and as it expands. And, depending on the success of the segment, I hope to get some feedback, get some input from you all about what types of conversations you would like to see happen, what kinds of questions are circulating in your mind about, in particular, the sort of practice of relating to one another as Black women, in a way that is beyond these sort of very commercialized notions of Black girl magic. This is not a Black girl magic segment. This is really a way of thinking about our socioeconomic conditions and predicament, and thinking about a particular praxis of love, a praxis of revolutionary love. And so I am looking forward to spending the next couple of weeks with you all, and we'll see where it goes.
So we hope you enjoyed this dope throwback episode and seeing the beginnings of this collaboration.
And we will be back next Friday with new content, same Black time, same Black place, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Tap in.